Chapter 20. Priya. Priya and her people had been given an abysmal location to set up their camp. On the edge of the grounds, far, far away from the war council tent, and Malini's own grand gold and white abode, right where the wind cut in coldly at night and the worst of the sun beat against the canvas during the day, turning it into a sweltering oven. It was no surprise, really. No one here had any love for Ahirani people. At least we're less likely to get stabbed by other soldiers here, right, Elder Priya? Nitin had offered helpfully, and Priya had glared at him until he scuttled off to sort out bedding or food or something else that was needful. Long after she left the temple to the Faceless Mother and the scent should have faded from her skin, Priya's hands smelled of flowers. Every time the fragrance reached her nose, she remembered Malini's hands on her arm and the garland caught between their bodies. Remembered the strange, heady feeling of standing like Malini's equal, staring into her fierce eyes with the shadow of the statue of the Faceless Mother fanned over both of them. She remembered how she had bowed to the Mothers of Flame. The memory was like a vein of rot, something ugly threading its roots through the golden sweetness of Malini's eyes and hands on her. Priya had done what was politically needful. She was no Bhumika and no Malini, but she understood that sometimes unpleasant things had to be done for the sake of the greater good. She had ruled and she had killed. Bowing was hardly the most difficult thing she'd done, and yet she'd betrayed something in herself by doing it. It was the old temple elders and her siblings who'd made her. It was Ahiranya that had shaped her into what she was. The Mothers of Flame were not hers to worship. If anything, they were hers to hate. But Malini had asked, and Priya had not said no. Did I bow for the sake of Ahiranya or for Malini? Priya had asked herself. It wasn't a question she could answer. She wasn't sure she wanted to. Priya stole one moment of herself, reaching and seeking into the Sangam, searching for her sister in the rivers. But no matter how she called, Bhumika refused to answer, and Priya returned to her skin ill at ease and a little angry. What was Bhumika doing? She distracted herself by combing out her hair, then carefully binding it in place with darts of wood. She was already wearing a white salwar kameez, her best, one of the few nice things she had carefully carried with her, wrapped in muslin to keep it from getting dirty or moth-bitten until she had a chance to wear it with the highborn company. Do you need me to do your hair? Sima asked, slipping into the tent. Priya dropped one of her pins, paused. Maybe, she said. Oh, Pri here. Let me. Sima gathered up Priya's hair and began to put the staves of wood in place. I've been listening to the gossip, Sima said, her voice low so they wouldn't be overheard. Only Nitin and a few other Ahirani soldiers were around, so Priya wasn't sure who could possibly hear, but it always paid to be careful. There's doubt among the highborn over whether the Empress should be Empress. They think the fire's a sign. The maids who were willing to speak to me, they said most of the common soldiers aren't so sure. One of the darts slid into place, poking Priya's scalp in the process. She winced, and Sima adjusted it. Sorry. Anyway, the highborn think they're being subtle, but they're not. Not at all, Sima snorted. I can see why your Empress was worried enough to drag you here. But what can I actually do? Priya thought. Be an emissary for Ahiranya. Certainly. Moon over Malini. She could do that as easily as breathing. But if Malini wanted more from her... Priya thought of how her powers had guttered on the journey here, and worry gnawed at her all over again. She reminded herself that she could feel the green now. The Sangam was waiting for her to reach out. But what use was it if Bhumika wouldn't answer her? She forced away her unease and turned to Sima. Let me do yours now, she said, taking Sima's long braid in her hands. And then we should probably go or we'll be late, and who knows how insulted those highborn women will be. Lata, Malini's sage, had come to personally request Priya's presence at a meeting of the Empress's closest companions. Lata had looked like no sage Priya had ever seen before. Her sari a glorious deep green silk, her braided hair severe, but her bangles a refined beaten gold. She looked like a high-born woman, but from her serious bearing and the ink on her fingers, it was clear she was more of an adviser, and from the way the guards bowed their heads, deferring to her, a senior adviser. If you were a man, Elder Priya, you would have been required to meet the high-born men who counseled the Empress, Lata had said, but as you are not, you must meet with the wives and daughters who attend the Empress Malini. Must? Priya had asked. Must, Lata stated firmly. Now, Sima and Priya left the sweltering heat of the tent and met the guard Lata had sent to guide them. They walked toward the main camp, where the tents for the other highborn stood. They passed Sakitan liegemen practicing with their blade whips out in the training circle, cordoned off with rope, a Shrungani soldier sleeping with his mace propped at his side, and a handful of cooks carrying vats of oil and sacks of rice, who gave Priya and Sima distrustful looks as they passed. The army encampment was carefully delineated into segments by city-state and liege loyalty, but the overall atmosphere was still one of pure chaos. Priya was a little dizzied by it. She'd never seen so many people in one place, and she'd nearly her entire life in the most populated part of Ahiranya. Still, she was fairly certain she'd managed to effect a look of serene calm by the time she and Sima reached their destination. The tent they were led to was large. When a guard announced them, they entered and were greeted by a pleasantly cool interior, faintly perfumed with rosewater and incense. There were bowls of water laid out to keep the air fresh, and a single maid desultory waving about a horsehair fan over an older woman who was dazing on a floor cushion. Two younger noblewomen were playing a game of chaturanga, which was set carefully aside when Priya and Sima entered. Malini was not present. Neither was Lata. Perfect. The younger noblewoman stood and nodded to Priya. She returned the gesture. Elder Priya, said one, a tall woman in a deep blue salwar kameez. It is a pleasure to finally meet you. She didn't even sound as if she were entirely lying. I am Lady Razia of Lal Kila. This is Lady Deepa. Deepa dipped her head and gave a small-voiced explanation of her origins. Priya had a vague sense, once introductions were done, that they should have bowed to her and should only have nodded in return. She was the leader of a nation, after all, and as ridiculous as that thought still felt, they were the wife of the lord of a fort and the daughter of a general of the imperial army. Though powerful, they were not her equals. She'd learned enough of cutthroat business of status and political hierarchies in the past war, watching Bhumika deftly manage Ahiranya's highborn, to recognize the disparities in their status. But what did it matter if they insulted her in this? What could she rightly do about it? She was still Ahirani, and they were still Empire. She didn't know how to cut down a highborn woman with words anyway, not the way Bhumika would have been able to do. So she just smiled. This is my advisor, Sima, she said, and Sima sketched out a rather abrupt bow. Should we sit? Of course, Razia said graciously, and they sat down as the maid lowered a fan and began to arrange refreshments and trays of sweets. They exchanged pleasantries, comments on weather, on travel. Deepa spoke haltingly about her family, her sisters and her mother, away from the political troubles of Parijat, safe in a family manse in Alor, then fell silent. Razia spoke of her home, of Dorawali's snow and mountains, and her gladness to be traveling alongside the Empress herself. I have long claimed to fear no fight, Elder Priya, Lady Razia said. But the last battle the Empress faced was unlike any I've seen before. I was injured, though you can see I am now well. She gestured at her skull and lowered her hand lightly. The battle filled me with a certainty that the Empress must have stronger allies around her. Allies like you. There was a challenge in her pale eyes and her smile. Can you demonstrate your strength to us, Elder Priya? It would gladden us all, I think, to know how you will defend our Empress. Bhumika would have known how to handle this situation. But Priya, well, she could only be more of what she was, and what she was good at being was herself, and all the problems that entailed. She settled on downing her wine in one smooth slide, Then, when her mouth was still burning pleasantly, and the alcohol hadn't quite warmed her blood, she said, "I'm afraid I can only use my gift at the Empress's bidding. It is a promise I have made to her, you see, to only act as she desires me to." Sima, who was sipping at her own wine, made a curious choking noise into her cup. "A small demonstration of skill would surely cause no harm," said Rizia. "Oh no," said Priya. "I couldn't possibly. I know the reputation of my people." She gave Rizia and Deepa a tight smile of her own. "I must act at the Empress's bidding or not at all." "You need not do anything, Elder Priya," Deepa said in that same small voice, "if you do not wish to. We are only curious. I have read much of Ahiranya, and I would like very much to learn more." "Maybe in the future if the Empress allows it," Priya said, "or if we meet a battle where Malini needs my help, or she weaves some other complex plot that requires me." That thought shouldn't have been as fond as it felt in her own skull. "Although I cannot show you my skills, Lady Rizia, my advisor is an able archer," Priya said cheerfully, "and I am sure she'd be happy to demonstrate." "An archer? Goodness!" said Lady Rizia, eyebrows rising. "Well, that is a skill highly valued where I come from. I would be glad to match my arrows against your advisor's if she is willing." "She absolutely is," said Priya firmly. "I am going to kill you for this," Sima muttered a little while later as they stood in a Dwalrali practice field, curious horsemen watching as Rizia strung her bow. A few maids had gathered to the side, and a group of Dwalrali women were milling about. They carried bows of their own, and one of them had set herself the task of setting up the target. "Or shave off your eyebrows. Something unpleasant. You wait and see. Think of it this way, you never would have done this as a maidservant." "Both eyebrows. And your hair," hissed Sima before she took up the bow one of Rizia's guards was helpfully holding out to her. Priya moved to stand in the shade with Deepa. A few men began to make surreptitious bets. The target was the strangest contraption Priya had seen in a long time. In Ahiranya, Jivan trained people with simple plaintive plank of wood. But this, Rizia announced, was a Dwalrali artifice used for archery games. A fish carved from gold, hollow at the eyes, hung precariously from a high rope. The guardsman who'd raised it up knocked the pole with her foot, and the fish began to twist wildly. "If we were playing as Dwalrali archers do," Rizia said to Sima, "we would judge where to shoot only looking at the reflection of the target in a basin of water laid on the ground. But we won't go so far for a simple game." Sima looked at the fish dubiously. "So I win if I knock it from the pole?" "Hitting it is considered enough," Rizia said, drawing her bow and knocking the arrow. "The eye is ideal. Let me demonstrate." The arrow flew from her bow, striking the eye of the twisting golden fish, sending it spinning wildly in the opposite direction. There were cheers from the watching crowd. The other Dwalrali women, though expressionless, were palpably smug. Sima squared her shoulders like a woman going to her death, grasped her bow, and stepped forward. There was no way this was going to end well. Priya was absolutely going to lose her eyebrows. "Where is Lata now?" Priya asked, turning to Deepa. Deepa startled as if she hadn't expected to be spoken to, then went still. "She was the one who summoned us here, and I haven't seen a glimpse of her." "Oh, with the Empress, I expect," Deepa said, darting a quick look at Priya. "They have meetings all day. Usually we attend alongside her, but sometimes we have responsibilities to our own people." "Was I your responsibility today?" Priya asked. Deepa gave her an almost alarmed look, and Priya grinned at her. "I'm sorry," she said. "I'm not high-born, Lady Deepa, and I'm an outsider here. I don't know how best to talk. Am I too blunt?" Sima's first shot had missed. Benevolently, Rizia allowed her to try again, and this time there was some mild applause as Sima's arrow took a glancing blow off the fish's torso. "No, Elder Priya," Deepa said when the clapping had faded. "Only, it is different. Interesting, to hear someone speak as you do. I will grow used to it, I am sure. You will need to be patient with me." "Sahar," Rizia called, and one of the Dwalrali women walked forward. "What do you think?" Lady Rizia asked. "She has some talent, doesn't she?" Sahar said, which was not exactly agreement.
She gave Sima a critical look. "Have you used a bow in battle before?" "Yes," Sima said steadily. "Have you injured anyone?" "I killed a man." "Did he walk into your arrow?" "Don't insult me," Sima said, but she was smiling. "I'm not that bad." No, not so bad," Sahar agreed. She had turned to Lady Razia. "My lady," she said, "I am happy to give our guest a lesson if that is your will." She looked in Priya's direction and said, a glimmer of amusement in her voice, "You're welcome to join too, Lady Deepa." Deepa squeaked out a refusal that sounded almost like I'd accidentally shoot myself in the foot. Priya bit back a laugh and watched the archery lesson begin. "Your advisor has some skill," Lady Razia observed, approaching Priya once Sima had departed. "But she is still raw. Not yet fully trained, I think. Perhaps the bow is a new skill to her. We have all had to learn new skills in Ahianya." "I imagine so," Lady Razia said. "When you are a people who serve another people, your options are narrowed. You are never quite given the tools to rise. And when you do rise, why, it is hard to build a palace from subpar stone with the help of a half-trained mason." As you say," Priya murmured. "But perhaps you are building something quite different." A pause, as Razia looked at her gaze thoughtful. "I will see your skill one day, Elder Priya. I look forward to it." Before Priya could respond, and spirits knew what she would have said to that, she heard a yell from somewhere beyond the practice yard. It sounded like Sima's voice. Without another thought, she turned and ran. There was Sima, surrounded by a ring of Sakitan soldiers. One was holding a sword whip out to her by the hilt. Sima was grim-faced, refusing to take it. As Priya strode closer, she began to hear what the man was saying to her. "Fight a Duawali, but you won't test your skills against us." So, they'd been watching then. "I don't know the sword whip," Sima said steadily. "You want to test your arrows against me, fine. We'll see who wins." "I saw you lose." "I was no match for Lady Razia," Sima said in the tone she used on all the guards at the Mahal in Hiranaprastha when they irritated her. "But I think I can take you." The soldier grabbed Sima by the wrist. In that instant, the fight was inevitable. Bhumika no doubt would have disagreed. Priya could practically hear her sister's exasperated voice in her head. "Of course the Parijatipan want conflict, Priya, but you don't have to give it to them." The man was muttering something, too low and viperous for Priya to make out the words. "My lord," Sima was saying, voice firm and loud enough to carry, "please control yourself. This is not an appropriate way to talk about my mistress or my people. Our land's cursed by your blight," the soldier was ranting, "and you want me to be polite. No, the others may be too cowardly to say anything, but we don't want you here. You Ahirani, you ruin everything you touch." "Then stop touching me," Sima said, wrenching her hand back. He didn't let go. And before Priya could do anything, Sima was lifting her left hand and punching him square in the nose. There was a crunch and blood, and the man holding Sima yelled and raised his whip. "Stop," Priya shouted. The ground rumbled beneath her. She didn't care if they felt it. Let them. "Is this how you treat advisors from other lands, soldier?" She shouldered her way through the circle of men. "What would your commander say about this?" The soldier dropped Sima's hand. She darted away from him, moving to stand at Priya's side. Priya took a deliberate step forward. The man was resisting the urge to step back. She could see it in the stiffness of his shoulders, the sudden twitch of his feet, but he stayed where he was. "You want a match with a sword whip, then I'll happily face you," Priya said. "I can show you how I've treated Emperor Chandra's men if you like. I'd be delighted to give you a practical demonstration." Her fingers twitched at her sides. If her damnable magic failed her, she would gladly take one of those sword whips and garrote this man with it. She knew she could do it. "No one is using any kind of whip against anyone else," Sima said. "Elder," she added, nudging her arm against Priya's, "there is no more need to defend me. I am sure this soldier has seen sense." "Lower your weapon, idiot," one of the other men murmured. And the soldier did. Good. Then he spat in Priya's face. "Fuck," Sima said feelingly. Once Priya would have taken that casual violence without a word, would have lowered her eyes and gritted her own teeth and tucked the hurt and rage away to be unseen. to rot and gather dust inside herself. She would have done nothing. She would have only wished that she could show him what she truly was. She didn't have to wish any more. The soil surged open like a wave. Something made of roots deeply buried, something sharpened to a blade by Priya's fury, surged up. The man screamed and danced back, dropping his whip. Yells filled the air. Priya very calmly closed the earth back up. She turned, meeting Simba's gaze, as one of the Sakatan soldiers grabbed her by the arm. Simba's eyes were wide, her face pale. Behind her, Deepa had emerged from the tent, mouth open in shock. "Don't worry," Priya wanted to say. "What can these men possibly do to me?" But she couldn't. She was being dragged away, and Simba was left alone, watching her go.